Hello. Uh, I am doing a little chatty video this time, so if you want to listen along, you can just grab a nice cup of tea and take a listen. I do now have this little mini microphone, so we'll see how this goes. I feel like one of those weird Gen Z YouTubers using it like this, but sound quality is important, I think, so we're gonna go with it. But yeah, I wanted to have a chat through today. As the title of the video suggests, we're going to be talking about colonoscopies, which is kind of a slightly random topic, but it's something that I know a lot about. Um, I say that as not a gastroenterologist specialist medical doctor. I say it as someone who's had a lot of colonoscopies in their life. And so I wanted to, I guess, talk through my advice if you're getting a colonoscopy. This is kind of niche. I'm going to release it to my Patreon. Maybe in future I'll put it on YouTube for broader audiences. I don't usually talk about colonoscopies in the Feel Good Club. I talk about mobility and other kind of health related chats. I'm a massage therapist, so a lot of my processes are based in like holistic bodywork stuff. Um, so yeah, colonoscopy is kind of a weird move, but I wanted to talk through because a lot of people find colonoscopies quite scary. I think they are an invasive procedure, and like with all invasive procedures, it's nice to have as much information as you can about the process. That said, I have only experienced what I've experienced, and yeah, I'm not your doctor. So follow your doctor's advice. This is not medical advice. Also, different hospitals and different regions have different processes. Most of my colonoscopies I'm fortunate enough to have had through private healthcare, but I did have one through public healthcare. But we'll talk about that in a sec. So I guess first, the first of all topic that we need to address is that I am 33, and for the last mm, 11, 12 years, um, it's been known that I have colonic polyps. Um, what are colonic polyps? Great question. I'd love to tell you. They are basically a polyp is just a growth. Um, it's kind of a term that's used to describe basically like a tiny tumor or cell mutation. And they can be really small, like a millimeter, or they can be bigger, like centimeter or centimeters, plural. And polyps can actually be anywhere in the body. I have a friend who has polyps in her sinuses, which she has to have removed because obviously you need your sinuses open so you can breathe. So polyps can happen anywhere, but they aren't typical. Um, Things that have been connected to the growth of polyps include, but are not limited to, smoking, heavy drinking, and you know, poor diet and lifestyle choices. However, in terms of Western medicine, they don't really have a clear causality that they can identify. And typically in Western medicine, the treatment process is to have them removed. The reason being is because there are different types of polyps, and some polyps can mutate into cancer. So, the presence of more than one or two polyps um, is typically unlikely. But I think, generally speaking, certainly with colonoscopies, so they're looking for polyps in the colon, if they find them, they typically remove them and have them tested so they know what type they are. And if they find polyps there in the colon, they typically do a repeat colonoscopy within a couple of years so that they can see if there's any more. And that gives them some indication on how fast the polyps or polyp may have grown. Obviously, if it's growing real fast, and especially if it's, a type that may turn into cancer, then they make different calls about how to treat you and how to manage that going forward. But for most people, they're not an issue. And also, you can have like small polyps in your body without even knowing, and you might not have any symptoms. Um, so, yeah, the presence of polyps in and of itself is not necessarily like a bad thing, or a problem, but lots of them, certainly if they're certain types, could be a problem. And so that's why a health professional might check for them or refer you to someone who can check you for them. And it's also why they're typically removed. Um, and so I'm kind of a rare case to what I understand, because polyps typically occur in elderly people, people over the age, well, elderly people and maybe people over the age of like 50. Um, that's being generous. It's usually 60 plus, 70 plus, people like that who get polyps. Um, and I guess there's various reasons for that, but obviously, if someone has spent their whole life smoking or whole life drinking or both, they're at higher risk for cell mutation. And one type of cell mutation is polyps. So, yeah, typically polyps are kind of a thing that old people get. And I'm not an old people. I'm not an old people. Um, so yeah, basically, the way that I came to find out that I get colonic polyps, um, is when I was in my early 20s. I think I was 21. Um, I had irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, which is just where you have kind of really dysregulated digestive health. And the doctor at the time, this was actually in Australia, the doctor at the time wanted to rule out anything structural or any kind of irritation in the actual organ of my bowels. So they referred me for colonoscopy. I don't, to my knowledge, there's no direct correlation between IBS and colonic polyps. Um, as I said, a lot of polyps can be asymptomatic, and a lot of people can have IBS symptoms and not have polyps. So there's not necessarily the connection, but the doctor wanted to rule out anything else. And I signed the waiver, obviously, like anybody else, when you're going for a colonoscopy, that says, like, if we, because you're under sedation for colonoscopy, I'll talk about the process in a second, but you typically sign consent that if they find a polyp, they remove it, so that they can just do it efficiently and effectively, straight away. So yeah, basically, when I was in Australia and I was 21 and I had IBS, I had my first colonoscopy experience. They do it a little bit differently in Australia, so when I talk about the process more, I will talk about the New Zealand experiences and processes more. But yeah, I had my first colonoscopy, and they actually found 7 polyps at that time. So anything more than like 1, maybe 2, um, is a high number of polyps. And so then finding 7, they were quite surprised. At that time, even though I was only 21, I didn't really drink that much. And I had never smoked, and I still have never smoked. And yeah, so they were concerned that there was a family history of polyps, that was not known to me. So my parents both had colonoscopies to check whether they also had polyps. And being older than me, that it was quite crucial that they find that out. But they didn't have any. I think my dad might have had one tiny one or something, but yeah, obviously that wasn't really an issue, because yeah, one tiny one that isn't growing quickly at all is like not really an issue at all. And neither of them had any symptoms to worry about or anything like that. So yeah, the presence of my 7 polyps was quite surprising and very unexplained. And so naturally, obviously, they removed them in that colonoscopy, and they were confirmed to be a benign form of polyp, so not cancerous. And then a few years later, it was supposed to be 2, but because I moved back to New Zealand, it ended up being closer to 3 years later. I had another colonoscopy here in New Zealand. And they were hoping that there would just be no more. And typically there would just be no more because you've had them removed and your bowel heals and you move on with your life. And in that time, my irritable bowel syndrome was significantly improved. I'd had separate treatment for that. I'd done things like acupuncture, and I also was having mental health treatment for anxiety. And the anxiety was more the reason for the IBS than anything else. So, with those things being managed and better well taken care of, my IBS symptoms were way less. So, when I came round to have that second colonoscopy, um, I was really optimistic and I was like, oh, it's just like really routine, just so they can check that all the polyps are gone and it's all good. And that's certainly how all the medical staff was sort of treating it. They were just like, oh, yeah, this is just like a follow up, kind of have to do it just to make sure, kind of thing. But there's no reason to think that there will be more polyps. There ended up being, I think they stopped counting because there's a limit to how long they can have you in the colonoscopy for. They stopped counting at like 37 polyps, I think. Um, and yeah, they basically confirmed that I have a condition where I grow a lot of polyps in my colon. There is a really long name for it, something like polyp something, like multiple polyp syndrome. But basically, I get colonic polyps, and they've all been benign. Um, but yeah, ever since then, I've pretty much had a colonoscopy every 2 to 2.5 years. So yeah, I had my first one when I was 21. I'm now 33, so I've had loads. And it's just become part of my life to get colonoscopies. Naively in my 20s, because when you're in your 20s, you just think that you'll be able to overcome anything without actually really focusing on it or thinking about it. I just figured that eventually that'll go away. And then last year, when I had another like 40 something polyps removed, I was like, okay, maybe we can't outgrow this one. So I've been, obviously managing various symptoms and stuff like that. I'm pretty prone to constipation, so that's something I have to be really proactive about. Um, but generally speaking, I'm not like consciously thinking about the polyps all the time every day. Obviously, I, just try and keep my digestive system moving. Um, but yeah, the polyps aren't like front of my brain all the time. But yeah, in August, I have my next colonoscopy. And so I thought I would talk through the process a little bit and talk through my experience. And if you're watching this and you're going to go and have your own colonoscopy, maybe this will give you some sense of the process and things to think about or things to do or not do. Um, so, yeah. So, firstly, the public health system currently in New Zealand, um, due to lack of funding, resources, and staff, um, has a massive wait list for colonoscopy and I think gastroscopy, which is where they check your stomach rather than your colon. Um, and so you might be waiting for months. So um, if your GP sends a referral to the public system, my recommendation is that, to keep calling the DHB to get a timeline on when your referral is going to be um, both received and then, acted on. Um, and because the reality is they might phone you like a month before you have to book the appointment and they'll be like, okay, we can book you now. And then you just have to take whatever dates are available. So yeah, I like to phone them and phone them and phone them and phone them. I typically set up like a 2 or 3 week reminder in my phone. And every time the reminder goes off, I phone the DHB and I'm like, hi, I just want to get an update on my referral. I do that because that way, if the referral has been missed or forgotten or something's gone wrong, like I can try and pick that up sooner rather than just waiting like a year.